Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm sure it's been a very fulfilling lunch and an awesome session so far. About 1.5 hours ago, we earned trillions of dollars with Mr. Ashish Chauhan, and he ensured that the financial needs that we require over the next 25 years are met. And since those needs are met, we'll now look at wants and spend that money. So with me on the panel to discuss probably the world's best market on the consumption side is Mr. Sanjeev Krishan. He's the chairperson of PwC India. We have Mr. Kunal Bahl. He's representing, he's the co-founder of Snapdeal, also with Ace Vector and Titan Capital. He'll look at the rural part of the consumption theme. And of course, we have Mr. Manish Sharma. He's the chairman and CEO of Panasonic India, the company that makes those wonderful televisions that you see across the country. We'll start. And my first question to you, Mr. Krishan, is that, PwC is probably the first port of call when it comes to a global aspirational brand wanting to come into India and setting up a marketing or a sales business. What are the 2 or 3 things that you tell them? How do you see India as an emerging consumption hub that it already is now?
So I think the most important thing is the heterogeneous nature of India's consumption market. I mean, we have the rural-urban divide. The tastes across the country are very, very different. We know that so many local brands are there. And then, we have a burgeoning middle class. Yet, interestingly, we see that the consumption prices, the price points at which people consume, they're actually, at the mass level, the consumption levels are very, very high. And because of the demographics that we see at this point in time, we also see that the young population at times do not necessarily want to just buy products. They actually want to, get into the experience side of things, right? They want to experience. So we have almost coined a term, consumption as a service, So I think India is a very, very heterogeneous market. And I think depending on who, because the consumption space is so wide, depending on what you are, whether you are on the staple side or you are on the product side and so on and so forth, I think there are multiple ways in which you could actually look at conversing with a customer. I think there are 2 things which actually stand out, as far as, because, when people come and talk to us, they obviously have a view as to why they want to be in India. Gone are the days to say that, okay, should we do India or not? India is the biggest consumption market, no question about it. I think 2 questions really stand out. What will cause the continued growth of consumption markets in India, and how will we leverage technology to enable that to happen? And how is India dealing with a bunch of transitions? I call it the 4 transitions. How is India dealing with those, and how is it that I can leverage those? So we talk about, and I will just maybe take 2 examples. The first and foremost really is that how can I be efficient in my production and in my distribution, considering India is such a vast market with different tastes across the country. I think that's a very, 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 very important consideration for people. And the second one, which stands out really, is that how do I leverage technology? Today we're talking about AI and so on and so forth. The question really is that we say that, okay, is it only on the consumption side, or is it also going to be on the supply side? How do I make my distribution and my consumption more efficient so that I can make the most out of the India market?
Right. Kunal, coming to you on this one, as the co-founder of Snapdeal, a unicorn that all of us are very familiar with, Snapdeal actually deals with Tier 2, Tier 3, Tier 4 cities, and has a pulse on how rural India shops online. Kunal, what's been your experience over the last 5 years, and where are we headed? Essentially, rural towns have actually more disposable income than probably cities like Delhi and Bombay, because expenses are on the lower side. Does that get reflected on online shopping?
Yeah, thanks for having me here. Before I get to the question, specific question, I think it's very important when we are discussing consumption in India and what the trends will be. It's good to understand, like they say in MBA classes, get to know the customer better first. Right? So if you were to just talk about who is this customer that everyone wants to go after. So maybe not today, but let's say 5-7 years out, by 2030, 75% of India's consumption will be by the middle class. So we are clearly moving away from being a bottom of pyramid and all those type of concepts to clearly a middle class driven consumption. At 2.1 trillion of consumption right now, which is give or take 60-70% of our economy, it's only going to go leaps at like 9 times in the next 25 years. So one is that a lot of the consumption is going to come from the middle class. Now that middle class may happen to be living in small towns, may be living in big cities, but they will be everywhere. Secondly, they're also going to be very young. Right? So by 2030, the median age of this consumer is 31. Right? And 77% of Indians by 2030 would have been born after the late 80s. So if we were to just think about that going around the room, how many of us actually qualify? Not too many. Yes. Right? Even I don't qualify. And third is that they are going to be extremely digitally connected. So by 2030, 9 out of 10 Indians over the age of 15 will be online. And they will also be transacting online significantly. So when you put together the constellation of these important facts, of the fact that the consumption is going to be middle class driven, it's going to be mainly young people buying, and a lot of it will be online. And a lot of their lives will be online, a lot of their transactions will be online. That gives a pretty good picture then of how the arc of consumption is going to go over the next coming many years. And the implications that has for companies wanting to go after these segments in the market. For instance, it has an implication of how distribution is done, where a lot of distribution is becoming increasingly digital enabled or even digital first. It has implications of how brands are positioned to different segments of, there is this concept in my investment firm, Titan Capital, we look at a lot of brands. We've invested in a lot of brands like, Mamaearth and Beardo, etc. And there is this concept we have, which is it's called the NMPB, right? Do you know what that means? NMPB.
We are all ears.
Okay, it's not my parents' brand. That this new generation doesn't want to buy their parents' brands. So there are a lot of implications going forward, whether it's rural or urban, where whether it's digital, aspirational, as well as novelty, are going to play a lot of role in how consumption happens in the country.
Let's get Manish into this conversation. And if you read India's balance sheet, the first import item is, of course, crude oil. The second is gold, and the third are electronic goods. So as the chairman and CEO of Panasonic India, Manish, where do you see maximum growth coming in India? Yours is a product which gets obsolete fairly quickly, and that means better supply chains, it means speaking more to your dealers and so on and so forth. So how do the next 5 years look to you as far as India is concerned, urban as well as rural?
Yeah, thank you for having me here. On a lighter note, televisions happen to be less than 5% of our revenues in the country, but potentially the biggest reason of our identity in the country. And I would say NMPC, not my parents' consideration, is also another, trend which we see these days. And that potentially will unlock the real potential of our country. So not my parents' consideration. Fundamentally, I say this because if you go in the past, quite often the perception is that in our country, the initial cost of acquisition quite often is the reason of the consideration. But that is significantly changing, and the fresh consideration is about total cost of ownership. And this is evolving really fast, that in the total life cycle, what will be the total cost which one would incur. And coming to the question which you asked, this is a very important subject. The life cycles of products are becoming shorter. I mean, look at mobile phones, televisions, air conditioners, a lot of refrigerators, washing machines, a lot of consumer products, the life cycle varies between a year or two. The SKUs quite often change in about a year or two. And this poses a huge challenge, stress on the entire supply chain. And this is a bigger challenge in our country fundamentally because we sit on a very low level of backward integration in the country. The value addition in majority of products does not exceed 15 to 20%. And if you look at last decade gone by, much has happened on the supply side. And when we look in the time gone by, quite often we can see a structured approach gone by. Say it would have started from capex incentives and finally coming into production linked incentives. This has done away with a significant part of disability which existed in the country. And we being just about 3 to 4 years away from that inflection point of $3,500 per capita, where a potential explosion of demand may happen, I believe we are getting into that space soon.
Okay. And perhaps that is typically the pot of gold that global marketers are looking at. Coming back to you, Sanjeev, you know, there's a waiting list for everything in India. You want to buy a high-end Mercedes, wait for 6 months. God forbid if you like watches, there is a waiting period of about 12 months. And in cities like Delhi, you know, people have watch portfolios of 20 crores and more in terms of value. And that's for the husband, the wife is separate. So this is one part of India which is probably, you know, being looked at by the entire global supply chain, all the top brands. When they come to you to set up an India plan, what are you telling them? I mean, is import the only way in? Should they start manufacturing here? Is this demand likely to continue? How about government barriers? What is it when you decide the game plan for them?
So I think first up, let me just give you an anecdote. I mean, 3 days back, I was with a retailer, and he was telling me that in a city like Kolkata, the amount of throughput that he has on some of his luxury brands is much higher in Calcutta than it was pre-COVID. While some of the more, you know, consumer or massy brands, etc., the throughput has actually gone down. And then he says that when you speak to some others, you know, people are actually extending the life of the products that they used to use. I mean, you use a toothpaste for, you know, 4 weeks, you're using it for 6 weeks or 5 weeks. So, you know, there is a clear, you know, we talk about COVID and we talk about a K-shaped recovery. I think this is a manifestation of the K-shaped recovery, because there are certain elements which are actually particularly the ones who have done well, who are buying more, and you know, some of the ones who haven't come off so well, they are actually having to extend the life of the product that they used to use. Now, this is exactly the point that, you know, anybody who's coming to India needs to take into consideration, because it actually goes down to my supply cost, my working capital, and so on and so forth, because the consumer response to events that happen. And today we are talking about a disruption which is going to hit us every 2 years. I mean, you know, demonetization happened. We said GST came along. Some of these could have been enablers for more formalized businesses. Then, of course, COVID came along, right? Today we are talking about, you know, some of the technology areas coming along, etc. The 4 transition areas that we're speaking about, you're talking about cars. I mean, now the whole thing about energy transition and moving towards hybrid and EVs coming along. Each of these disruptions will impact, because we are such a huge consumption market, each of these in some ways enables, but in many cases makes it a point of consideration for a consumer player. And it certainly impacts, and you know, working capital is such a significant element for any consumer business. So I think these are all very significant factors. I think, again, I would like to just talk about 2 more things. You know, when they talk about it on a long-term basis, since that was also the underlying theme, I think one of the areas that they continue to remain very, very concerned about is that what is the participation, and I heard in the earlier panel also people talk about it, while that was more for manufacturing, that why aren't there more women in working in India? Because, you know, they can have a very significant impact to the GDP of the country, and, you know, we know that private consumption is almost 60% of the GDP at this point in time. So why aren't there more women in the workforce in India, right? With the kind of growth that GCCs are happening, you know, captive centers are happening in India, 50% of the world's captives are based in India. Why aren't there more women in the workforce in India at this point in time? I think, you know, and what can they do to enable some of this? So they also want to, you know, be demand creators at some level. And let me finish, just one other point is that, you know, on an education side, where are we on the broader education side? Because from that standpoint, this could again be very significant enabler. Just again going back to the GCC example, better education, more people can be enabled for GCCs, and there can be greater consumption.
There's There's an interesting anecdote that I'd like to share. You talked about more women participation. We look at listed companies all the time, and there's a listed footwear maker whose product profile was changing from slippers to sandals. And you could see that happening, quarter over quarter, quarter over quarter. So, and the stock was doing phenomenally well. I just talk about how, women participation is changing companies' balance sheets as well as production line over the medium term as well. Kunal, coming to you, you wear two hats. Of course, you are a co-founder to Snapdeal and a very well-known venture capitalist. You look at how online shopping has changed our lives dramatically on Facebook as well as Instagram. A lot of youngsters might be coming to you with a laptop presenting that this is the next brand that's going to take over the country, whether it's Mochi. So many Indian brands are coming up, and especially in the case of Indian liquor, they're phenomenal. What's your experience on that side of the table when you wear your venture capitalist hat and look at the consumption theme growing in the country?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. I continue to be incredibly surprised at the level of risk that these young founders are willing to take to go and penetrate seemingly very well-established industries with established players and leaders. One of the enduring themes I've seen in brands that eventually become very big, these new age brands or what they call digital native brands, there is a common theme I've noticed with each one of them, is that when they start, they tend to start with an attempt to dominate laughably small TAMs, laughably small markets, where it may, like for instance, let's take Mamaearth. I remember I met Varun and Ghazal when they were just starting 6 years ago. I think they were doing 5 or 7 lakhs of monthly sales. I think they do now, I don't know, it's in their DRHP, probably 150 crores a month now. And they were making mosquito repellents for children. So that's what I qualify as a laughably small TAM. Because the ability for a new age brand with limited resources and only digital distribution at their disposal, along with all the working capital issues that were alluded to by Sanjeev and you earlier, all they can do is dominate a really narrow sliver in the market. But if they're able to successfully do that, it gives them wings to expand their TAM. And then suddenly, in their case, for instance, they went into shampoos and soaps and then for the mother and then for the father and then into other dermatology-related products. And this has happened over and over again. There was a company 8-9 years ago we invested in which was making, believe it or not, beard oil. And this is before Virat Kohli grew a beard. So it seemed like the most atypical thing for someone to build, and incredibly smart founders who thankfully had beards of their own, so they knew that they needed it, that's why they built it. But once this brand got established and became dominant in that very narrow sliver of the market, they grew the TAM by adding face washes and other grooming products. And now today, Beardo is one of the largest male grooming brands in the country.
Perhaps male grooming is one of the most one of the least reported and perhaps the most high margin segments on online shopping, but we'll look at that a little later. Manish, coming to you. You straddle both parts of the world, which is manufacturing, because the government wants that kind of business to be made in India via the PLI scheme. As also you have a very strong global brand, which at least for the last 4-5 generations, Indians are very familiar with. What's the game plan from now on, given, nuclearization of families, India urbanizing at about 1% a year? How is demand overall for top-end consumer items such as yours?
Significant shifts are happening actually across the value chain, and within the supply chain, say within manufacturing, significant changes are happening, and the need of the hour for the industry, and so would be the case with us also, is to ensure that we drive backward integration. And this potentially cannot be left only to the policies or the interventions which one would have witnessed happening over last several decades, and in particular since the PLIs came into existence. And you would notice that PLIs essentially are on backward integration, which is on components itself. And the second change within manufacturing which is happening and which is very necessary for us to embrace in our country is how do we drive higher productivity? And therefore moving to real industry 4.0 solutions which are very specific to our country should be taken care of. Then the second aspect of the supply chain is the logistics itself, and so much of loss happens. With improving infrastructure, I believe that will improve quite rapidly, and we are already witnessing lower costs of logistics starting to happen. But within the space of cold chain, I think much has to happen. We still continue to, as a country, make significant losses. The third aspect is where, say, the retail or the consumption happens. There, again, significant shifts are happening. And as I started off by mentioning that people are now starting to consider total cost of ownership as one of the criteria for their purchasing decisions. The another thing which is creating significant disruption is rapid digitalization, of course, across all the three spectrums of supply chain, but in specific within the spaces where people live or people work. And therefore, it is important for organizations to drive and become part of that change. And a very small example is that no longer is the case that products deal with people or people deal with products in isolation. Now, both products have started to talk to each other, and products in total have started to talk to people. And in this situation, how can we create comfort and convenience, which was the need of the past, well-being for people, safer environments, and energy efficiency. So I believe this is a large topic, but I think this will revolve around these values in the time to come.
Absolutely. The Internet of Things is making lives easier for all of us. And you mentioned supply chains. I'm sure e-way bills, FASTag, better highways, better trucks. If you're if you love driving cars and you do them across the 500-kilometer radius that around Delhi, the highways are fantastic. And now you'll notice that 16 32-wheeler trucks are par for the course, and that's moving the economy much, much faster. Coming to you, Sanjeev, we were just discussing it in the guest room about how artificial intelligence is actually sucking away the problems that are there in India's supply chain, both sides, whether it is from the factory to the from the raw material side to the factory and from factory to the consumer side. What has been your experience on how AI is changing this background of consumption?
So I think it's early days yet, to be honest, but I think it's certainly something which everybody, including some of the large retailers, consumer businesses are focused on at this point in time. I think the simple point, as Manish was also mentioning, is that how can I get efficiency in my supply chain, right? There has been a significant amount of work which has been done. I mean, things like Gati Shakti and others in some ways are huge enablers because over the years, one of the big challenges for India really has been a logistics cost. So I think that clearly the focus is on getting the right matrices on the logistics cost. From an AI perspective, when we speak about AI, I think particularly post GST and with the whole new schema around warehousing as a result of GST, etc. And what I would call near warehousing, the whole concept has changed. I think the intent really is that how can you plug and play where you should be spending capital costs, where should you be spending any capital cost to make sure that there are efficiencies on your supply chain. I think that's the biggest thing, because the customer proximity, and where is your customer, where is your place of produce, where is your place of storage, and how can you optimize it. I think those are the three things which need to be enabled by AI, and that is where the biggest focus currently is of retailers. I would also say that this is important because many times it is always felt that AI can actually only be focused on the front end. It is not like that. That, okay, how does a customer think about a particular product? Can you do something in metaverse and so on and so forth? But technology can be a huge enabler. I think 5G itself can be a huge enabler when it comes to things like logistics costs and so on and so forth. And with the advent of AI, I think it's an additional element which has been added now.
Right. If you have a great highway network and all of it is working well on the back-end electronic part, the thumb rule suggests that you could add probably 1% GDP point to your overall growth in the economy. Coming to you, Kunal, over the last 12 months or so, we've seen a funding winter hit the world of unicorns as well as startups. Do you think at this stage, I mean, you've been doing this for about 10, 12 years as far as Snapdeal is concerned. Is it possible to set up a profitable online model in India?
The simple answer is yes, but I think we've done it, others have done it. I think we always, as founders, we are always in a rush. That's the big problem. And then we further induct people in our journeys, a la investors, who are in a bigger rush than us. So it's all our own doing, to be honest. We can't really blame anyone else. But you know, that's how innovation happens, that's how disruption happens. It is sometimes destructive in the near term, but accretive in the long term. That said, you know, India's startup ecosystem is more vibrant than it ever has been. This funding winter, as you're referring it to, or funding slowdown, as I refer it to, is probably the biggest blessing for the ecosystem, because what has happened is a lot of capital has come in a short period of time over the last 4 or 5 years post-Geo, given the, you know, we always are short-term more exuberant, and that exuberance has been demonstrated by the amount of capital that's come in and been spent. But a lot of value has gotten created along the way. So while there may be some fat around the value, but that fat is melting away because companies are having to get fit fast.
Right. So we'll see a slimmer, fitter, and a far better startup universe in the country, say, over the next 2 years or so. The final set of questions, and coming to you, Sanjeev. Over the last 10 years or so, and especially in the previous 5, there have been many disruptions. You mentioned demonetization, you mentioned the implementation of the GST, and of course now the withdrawal of the 2,000 rupee note. In your crystal ball, what possibly can go wrong that may derail this consumption theme?
Okay, so I'll answer that question, but before that, you know, with Zepto's $1.4 billion valuation, I think we should be now calling it the spring is there, the spring is there, maybe not, so we'll see as to how it pans out. But I think I agree, there was no winter, there was a slowdown, but anyway. So I think in terms of what could derail, I think it is one, our inability to adopt to technology at the pace at which it will transcend. Because, you know, honestly, in my view, you know, we dealt with blockchain, we dealt with metaverse, so on and so forth. I don't think that there is anything which will be as disruptive to businesses as AI can be, right? I mean, you know, some of these people have a view, jury's out, whether blockchain worked or did not work, whether metaverse worked, did not work. People are talking about, you know, the death of metaverse already. But I think AI will be a huge disruptor, and unless we can really embrace it, I think businesses will have a challenge on both sides. I mean, you know, and of course the broader ecosystem. I think that would be one. I think the second one, to my mind, would be that what is the see, in a way, the large part of the consumption boom has been enabled by a significant amount of public investment that has happened, and that in some ways has been because, you know, even today, if you look at our debt to GDP, is not too bad, right? So public investment has actually fired a lot of that private consumption. We say private consumption is 60%. We need to continue to be able to create jobs, and I think that's very, very critical. And you know, while we are doing a lot on the manufacturing PLI side, I talked about captives and so on and so forth. I mean, let's be honest, the median income has not really grown as much, right? We are saying that, okay, once it is above $2,000, you know, there can be a quadruple jump. I mean, it's been range bound, let's be honest about it, right? So I think there is some structural reforms which are needed. That's a separate discussion altogether. But, you know, I think that's something that I would worry about.
India works in mysterious ways, and it's always been a mystery as to how much and where does all this money come from, but perhaps that's for a different event. Manish and Kunal, both of you are pure consumer plays. Manish, you first. What keeps you awake?
Sorry, come again?
What keeps you awake at night?
I mean, so much of possibilities, opportunities, and one's ability to convert temporary adversities into opportunities. I think that keeps me awake, and there is so much of promise and potential in our country. This is the place to be.
Wonderful. Kunal, you keep awake at night mainly because all the people shop online only at night. So what keeps you worried during the day?
Well, thankfully you didn't ask me the what keeps you awake at night because I sleep pretty peacefully, so nothing would be. But I do feel incredibly energized during the day because having seen the evolution of our when I started, there was nothing known as a startup. You either were doing a job or you're doing a business. So this startup word has come into national parlance only in the last 5-6 years. So coming from the time when there were 5 million internet users in India when I started to now 1 billion internet users, and having seen the entire arc of India's digital ecosystem getting developed over the last 15 odd years, I'm nothing but like incredibly enthusiastic about what the future holds. I think the journey is just starting. We've been so excited about what has already happened, but we will be so immensely surprised and positively so about what's going to happen in the next 10 years.
Wonderful. On that very excellent and wonderful note, we'll draw a close to this session. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for those wonderful insights. Just a moment.
Thank you, gentlemen. What a lovely panel. And I'd like to call on stage Mr. Dinesh Bhatia, Group CEO, India Today, to felicitate our guests. And now, a session that I've personally been waiting for. As a tech enthusiast, we've discussed artificial intelligence in a myriad ways, but the aspect that we're going to be talking about now is something that will absolutely blow your mind. A blockbuster session titled Managing with AI. We are honored to have a distinguished global professor who specializes in exploring the management implications of artificial intelligence. Our esteemed guest brings a wealth of knowledge and expertise, shedding light on the transformative power of AI in the world of management. In a conversation with Kali Puri, Vice Chairperson at the India Today Group. Guys, brace yourselves. This is going to be an amazing session. A huge round of applause, please.
I mean, I'm loud, but I'm not that loud. So good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. It's my great pleasure to introduce you today to Professor Sumitra Datta. He is the founding dean of Cornell Business School and currently the dean of Said Business School in Oxford University. That's a special privilege for me since I'm an undergraduate from Oxford University. In one of your interactions, because I spent the evening with you yesterday digitally, I heard that one of the biggest secrets of success in business is being open to serendipity. And one of the things that's been keeping me up at night for the last many months is AI and its potential. So today, the ability to pick your brain, somebody who has done his PhD in AI 30 years ago and has been following the subject since then, I would say is serendipity. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I'm dropping my son to university in a few days' time, and he's going to be studying history for 4 years. And I'm just wondering, when he comes out of university, is he going to have any skills that are relevant?
He will have some skills for sure, but first of all, congratulations on your son joining university. That's always an important step in the life of any young person.